the God of light, God of fire. What I find the most interesting about your book is that's the God that I least want to have powers. Maybe the seven to protect all those people that are praying to him for protection, but they never get protected. And yet Varys is castrated, it's sacrificed into the fire, and the fire speaks back. And then we have the theme, of course, of ice, of all of the evil that's coming when winter is coming. Is that, I guess what I'm trying to get at, is that what the fire and ice and fire is all about in the book?
Well, I'll let you figure out what Ice and Fire is about in the book. But I will say, one of the most important things about the books is the structure that I use of viewpoint characters. You see everything through the eyes of a particular viewpoint character, and you hear things. I don't do omniscient narrative. In other words, I'm not telling these from the viewpoint of whatever god. So when you say the fire speaks back, well, Varys says the fire speaks back when he's telling the story, which is then being retold, and it's 30 years later. You might tell a story, something happened to you 20 years ago, and then if I looked at a time machine, would it be exactly what you remember, or would time and memory have colored things? I want people to try to kind of think about things. We sometimes get two viewpoint characters telling very different stories about what happened at the same event, just as we do in real life. You can look in the newspapers and even contemporary events, and depending on what newspaper or TV station you put on, you get a different version of it. So there's a lot of subjectivity that's involved here, and that's a deliberate authorial choice.
I love it. All right, so I have some questions from our fans. First question, Dennis Ingram. He's the bassist for the Sneaker Kings. He wanted to know, how long does it usually take you to write a chapter? Does it take more time for a certain character's chapter, for example?
Yes, it does. I mean, typically, and I've said this many, many times before, but Tyrion has been, at least for the first 3 books, Tyrion was the easiest chapter to write. His chapters virtually wrote themselves. Mm-hmm. When I hit books 4 and 5, Tyrion's chapters became much harder to write because he was in a very dark place, and he was wrestling with a lot of demons. And I really had to try to keep that in mind at all time. Bran was traditionally the hardest one to write because he's a young character. He was the youngest of the regular cast, and it's difficult to write from the viewpoint of a kid because you know what's happening in the scene, but is the kid going to know what's happening in the scene? Is he old enough to understand? And you have to try to put it in his language, and all of that can be done, but it takes time, it takes effort. You can't just kind of let it flow. So, but yes, as to how long it takes to write a chapter, well, 2 days, 10 years. I've had both cases.
Xtina, she's Barrio Honey on the cover of Fresh Donuts, wants to know, when will you give Theon Greyjoy a break?
Well, I don't know. I don't think in terms of giving the characters a break. But Theon has been through some rough times, mind you, but he's also done some awful things. So maybe it's karma.
I find as a writer, sometimes the most stressful and exciting opportunity is that you have a story inside of you and you have to figure out how you want to communicate it. How do you come up with your overall theme and narrative structure for a new book like Ice of Fire and Game of Thrones?
I don't think in terms of overall themes or things like that. The theme emerges from the writing of the book. I think in terms of character and incident and scenes, and one thing leading to another, and looking at the world and trying to tell the truth about it, whether it's the real world or a fictional world. I do see these scenes in my mind as a process of daydreaming, I guess. It's not night dreaming. People ask me if I dream my stories. I don't. But daydreaming, sometimes doing nothing. I mean, back early in my life when I lived in Chicago, I had like a half-hour commute on the L to go to work. And just sitting there in the L and watching the streets of Chicago flash by, a lot of stories would come to me then, just nothing to do. I didn't read a paper. I just gazed out the window, and that daydreaming, scenes would start coming, things and pieces of dialogue, and then you have to get it down before it fades onto the paper. The scenes exist in your head in a kind of pristine brilliance. The hard work is translating that to the paper, and you can see the battle, you can see the room. And now you have to describe it so the reader can see it too. And our instruments are words, which are wonderful things. I get drunk on words sometimes, but they're also stubborn, crude instruments that don't always fit what you want, and you hammer at the sentence, and it's still not getting across the way you see it in your head. So how do you make it get in the head, and what order do you put it in? That's the struggle. That's why writing's so hard.
Absolutely.